From Seoul. He got it on the black market.
Black market.
106 million people watched this episode. Not the Super Bowl, not the moon landing, a sitcom about a war most of them never lived through. And here's the part nobody tells you. One tiny detail hidden in this show completely changes the meaning of its theme song. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Now, if you grew up with MASH, you already know this wasn't just a comedy. It was the kind of show you laughed at, and then 5 minutes later, it hit you right in the chest. Hawkeye, Trapper, the 4077th. It felt real. But even the biggest fans, the ones who've seen every episode 10 times over, missed some of the most unbelievable details hiding in plain sight. And one of them? It changes everything about how you hear that opening helicopter scene. So before you think you know this show, let's take a closer look at 8 moments, secrets, and hidden truths that will completely change the way you see MASH. Because by the end of this, you're not going to hear it the same way again. Real quick, because I know you didn't come here for a speech, somewhere out there, there's someone who shows up to every family dinner and never once calls grandma. That person is you, watching this channel without subscribing. It's free, 2 seconds. Hit the button and let's keep this going. Okay, back to the show. Fact 8. MASH ran for 11 years. The Korean War lasted 3. Here's something most people never really stop to think about. When they were tuning in every week, the show they were watching was set inside a war that ended in 1953, a 3-year conflict. And yet MASH, the television series, ran from 1972 all the way to 1983. 11 full seasons. That's nearly 4 times longer than the actual war it was depicting. On paper, that sounds a little absurd. Imagine a documentary about a 3-day fishing trip that somehow runs for 12 hours. That's the math here. But what made MASH work? What made that math not just acceptable, but essential, is that the writers were never actually writing about Korea. They were writing about Vietnam. They were writing about the soldiers coming home in the 1970s, with things they didn't have words for. They were writing about the doctors and nurses and draftees who were watching the show, and quietly recognizing themselves in every single scene. The Korean War setting was essentially a costume, a really convincing costume, but a costume. The real subject was always the cost of war on ordinary human beings, regardless of the decade or the country. And here's the clever part. That historical distance, that "this happened back then" framing, allowed the producers to sneak storylines past the network that would have been immediately rejected if the show had been set in 1972 Vietnam. War themes, anti-authority humor, grief dressed up as comedy. The network was far more relaxed about it all when it was set 20 years in the past. So every joke, every argument between Hawkeye and Frank, every absurd scheme Klinger cooked up to get discharged, it was all a conversation happening in real time about what was happening just outside the living room window. That's not trivia. That's the whole reason this show was as important as it was. Fact 7. The theme song was written by a 14-year-old boy. This one is easy to miss, because the opening theme, "Suicide is Painless," just sort of became part of the furniture of the show. You heard it, you felt something, and then the episode started. Most people never stop to ask where it came from. So, where did it come from? The film version of MASH came out in 1970, directed by Robert Altman. Altman needed a song for the movie, specifically something that was melancholy and a little absurd at the same time. Something that captured the dark humor of the whole story without being heavy-handed about it. He tried to write it himself. He couldn't crack it. So he gave the task to his son, Mike Altman, who was, at the time, 14 years old. Now, I want you to pause for a second and genuinely think about what you were doing at 14. Maybe playing outside, maybe arguing with a parent about homework, maybe watching TV, possibly MASH. Mike Altman was 14 years old and writing what would become one of the most recognizable and emotionally resonant theme songs in the history of American television. And here is the part that is just genuinely chef's kiss in terms of cosmic irony. Mike Altman's songwriting royalties reportedly earned him significantly more money than his father made from directing the entire film. The son made more than the dad from a song he wrote as a high school freshman. Robert Altman's feelings about this reportedly landed somewhere between deeply amused and deeply not amused, depending on who's telling the story. But either way, every single time you hum that opening theme, you are humming the work of a teenager who probably didn't fully understand what he just created. Fact 6. Gary Berghoff, Radar, was hiding something in almost every single scene. If you watched the show at all, you know Radar. Walter Radar O'Reilly, the soft-spoken, baby-faced company clerk who always seemed to know what was coming before it happened. Always had his teddy bear, always had a mug of something warm. Gary Berghoff played him in both the film and the television series, making him one of the very few cast members who made that crossover. But here's what you almost certainly never noticed. And once I tell you, you will not be able to unsee it. Gary Berghoff was born with a congenital condition. That just means something he was born with, rather than something that developed later. It left the fingers on his left hand smaller, less fully formed than a typical hand. In nearly every scene, across all the seasons he appeared in, he was holding something in that hand. A clipboard, a piece of paper, a mug, something, anything, to keep it partially out of frame, obscured from the camera. Think about the coordination that required, not just from Berghoff himself, but from the directors, the camera operators, the entire crew, working around it for years without it ever becoming a headline, without it ever pulling focus away from the character, without the audience ever noticing. He wasn't hiding it out of shame, at least, not primarily. He simply didn't want it to be the story. He wanted people to see Radar, not his hand. And for the entirety of his run on the show, that's exactly what they saw. Most people who watched MASH hundreds of times across their lifetime never once spotted it. There's a quiet kind of professionalism in that story that deserves a moment. A man showed up every day, did extraordinary work, and asked for none of the wrong attention. That's worth something. Fact 5. Alan Alda didn't just play a surgeon, he actually learned surgery. Here's something that a lot of people never really considered while watching. Hawkeye Pierce wasn't supposed to be a decent surgeon. He was supposed to be one of the best surgeons in the United States Army, the kind of doctor who could operate under fire, under pressure, with limited supplies and zero sleep, and still save a life that nobody else could save. Alan Alda understood that playing that character convincingly wasn't just about memorizing medical-sounding dialogue. He worked closely with real surgeons throughout the show's run. He observed actual procedures. He familiarized himself with real surgical techniques until his movements in the operating room had genuine credibility. He did not want Hawkeye to look like an actor pretending to perform surgery. He wanted him to look like a man who had done it 1,000 times. What's remarkable, and honestly a little unsettling, is what that commitment did to him over time. Alan Alda has spoken openly about the fact that by the end of the series, after 11 years of immersing himself in war, trauma, and the emotional weight of the stories MASH was telling, he was genuinely struggling. He has described experiencing symptoms consistent with what we now understand as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Basically, the psychological damage that builds up from repeated exposure to traumatic situations, even fictional ones, at high intensity. He has talked about hallucinating during the filming of the finale, seeing things that weren't there. The boundary between Hawkeye's breakdown and his own had become uncomfortably thin. That is not acting anymore. That's something else. And it says everything about why his performance across 11 seasons felt so impossibly real. Because, in ways he didn't fully anticipate, it was. Hey, only about 1 in every 100 people watching this right now is actually subscribed. If this feels like the kind of conversation you want to keep having, real stories, real history, the stuff that makes these old shows mean even more, subscribe right now. Free, instant, done. Okay, back to MASH. And this next one, it hit the cast like a gut punch. Fact 4. Henry Blake didn't just leave the show, he was killed, and almost nobody saw it coming. This is probably the single most discussed moment in MASH history, but even the people who know the broad outline of it often don't know the full story behind it. So let's go back. McLean Stevenson played Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake, the warm, bumbling, genuinely well-meaning commanding officer of the 4077th for the first 3 seasons of the show. He was beloved. He had chemistry with everyone. He was, in a lot of ways, the emotional center of gravity for the early series. He also wanted out. Stevenson had convinced himself that his star power was being buried inside an ensemble cast, and that leaving MASH to pursue solo projects would launch him to a different level of fame. The producers tried to talk him out of it. They could not. So they wrote him out. And here's where it gets heavy. In the final episode of Season 3, Henry Blake receives his discharge papers. He's going home. The war is over for him. There's a celebration, hugs and goodbyes, and the kind of emotional send-off that feels like a series finale, even though the show had 8 more years to run. It's warm, it's funny, it's everything you'd want from a farewell episode. And then, in the last 30 seconds, Radar walks into the operating room. The team is in the middle of surgery. He's holding a piece of paper. He reads it aloud. Henry Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors. The cast did not know this was coming. The crew did not know. Most of the actors found out exactly the way the audience did. In the moment, on camera, reading those words for the first time, in front of the lights and the crew and everybody. The tears you see on the faces of those cast members are not performance. They are real. The shock is real. The grief is real. The studio audience fell completely silent. There was no laugh track cue on Earth that could have covered what had just happened. For what many consider the very first time in television history, a sitcom had killed a beloved main character. Not as a stunt, not for ratings, but to tell the truth about war. McLean Stevenson went on to headline several other television projects after leaving. None of them ever came close to what he'd had at the 4,077th. Some exits cost more than they're worth. This was one of them. Fact 3. Alan Alda went to war against the laugh track, and he mostly won. In its early seasons, MASH used a laugh track. That's pre-recorded audience laughter dubbed over the episode to cue viewers on when something was funny. Standard television practice at the time. The networks loved it. Most shows used it without a second thought. Alan Alda hated it. Not because he was precious about comedy. He loved comedy. But the problem was where the laugh track was being used. Specifically, in the operating room scenes. In the scenes where soldiers were lying on tables, bleeding out. Where doctors were making desperate calls under impossible pressure. Where the subject matter was, to put it plainly, life and death. And somewhere in a sound booth, someone was pressing a button to prompt recorded laughter. Over all of it. Alda pushed back, directly, repeatedly. He argued that the laugh track in those scenes was sending the audience a signal. That this was light, that this was okay, that they didn't need to feel anything real. He believed it wasn't just tonally wrong, it was ethically wrong. It reduced the weight of what the show was actually trying to say. The network eventually agreed to a compromise. The laugh track would be removed from all outdoor scenes and all operating room scenes. The indoor barracks scenes kept it. The comedy beats kept it. But the surgery, the heart of the show, went quiet. Now, that might sound like a small creative win. It was not. It fundamentally changed the emotional experience of watching MASH. The scenes that were meant to be funny got to be funny. The scenes that were meant to break your heart got to break it. The audience was trusted to feel the difference, without being told how to respond. Some television historians, people who literally study this for a living, consider that specific creative decision one of the most significant in the history of the American sitcom, because it proved that a comedy could be serious. That laughter and grief could sit in the same episode, in the same scene, in the same breath, and that audiences were more than capable of holding both at once. MASH didn't invent that idea, but it proved it could work on a massive scale, in front of millions of people, week after week, for 11 years. Fact 2. The finale broke every record in television history. It still hasn't been beaten. We touched on this number at the very top, but let's actually sit with it for a second, because I don't think people genuinely appreciate what it means. February 28, 1983, the MASH series finale, titled Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, aired on CBS. The episode runs 2.5 hours. It follows Hawkeye's psychological breakdown, the end of the Korean War, and the final disbanding of the 4,077th. 106 million Americans watched it. Let's put that in context. The Super Bowl that year drew around 81 million viewers. The finale of Cheers in 1993 pulled about 80 million. The last episode of Seinfeld brought in roughly 76 million. The finale of Friends got about 52 million. The MASH finale beat all of them, and it wasn't particularly close. More than 40 years later, it remains the most watched single episode of any scripted television series in American history. Nothing has touched it. And here is the detail that I love the most, the one that makes the whole thing feel real in a way that numbers alone just don't capture. Cities across the country reported dramatic spikes in their water system usage immediately after the episode ended, because millions of Americans had spent 2.5 hours sitting completely still, refusing to get up, refusing to miss a single second, and then all got up at the exact same moment. That was measured. That actually happened. Water engineers noticed it. When a television show can make an entire country hold it, together, collectively, simultaneously, for 2.5 hours, you are no longer talking about entertainment. You are talking about something that became a shared national experience. And those, as any older viewer in this audience knows, don't come along very often. Fact 1. MASH was treating PTSD on screen before the medical community had even named it. This is the one. This is the detail that, once you fully understand it, changes how you watch every single episode you have ever seen. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, was not officially recognized as a diagnosable condition by the American Psychiatric Association until 1980. Before that, what soldiers experienced after combat had different names across different eras: shell shock, battle fatigue, war neurosis, gross stress reaction. But there was no unified, accepted clinical framework for understanding it, naming it, treating it, or even consistently acknowledging it as a legitimate medical condition, rather than weakness. MASH started airing in 1972, 8 years before the diagnosis officially existed on paper. And from the very first season, the show was depicting, in precise and recognizable detail, what we now understand unmistakably as PTSD. Characters who couldn't sleep. Characters who drank, not socially, but compulsively, as the only mechanism they had for suppressing memories they couldn't handle any other way. Characters who cracked under pressure in ways that ran far deeper than comedy. Characters who were simultaneously the funniest people in the room and the most quietly devastated. Hawkeye Pierce's arc across 11 seasons is, in retrospect, one of the most careful and honest portrayals of a person experiencing cumulative psychological trauma in the history of American television. His humor was his coping mechanism, a shield he held up between himself and the unbearable reality of what he witnessed every day. His anger was grief. His inability to take anything seriously was the only way he could function while taking the most serious thing imaginable completely seriously. The finale makes all of it explicit. Hawkeye suffers a full psychological break. He ends up in a psychiatric facility working through a traumatic memory, a memory that turns out to be worse than what he initially told himself it was. The show does not soften it. It does not resolve it neatly with a hug and a closing joke. It says, plainly and without apology, this is what war does to people, even the funny ones, especially the funny ones. In 1972, the American public did not yet have the vocabulary to describe what the show was showing them. The veterans watching MASH from their living room chairs, the guys who came home from Korea and from Vietnam and spent years not having words for the weight they were carrying, saw themselves on that screen. Many of them saw themselves, for the first time, represented honestly, not as heroes, not as damaged goods, just as human beings who had been asked to survive something that human beings aren't really built to survive cleanly. For a lot of those people, MASH was not entertainment. It was recognition. And it happened in a living room, on a Tuesday night, long before anyone had the clinical language to explain why it mattered so much. If there is one thing on this entire list that you carry with you after today, let it be that one. MASH wasn't just a sitcom. It was a mirror, one of the clearest, most honest mirrors that American television ever held up to itself, to the cost of war, to the resilience of ordinary people under impossible pressure, to the strange, necessary, and deeply human relationship between laughter and grief. If any of these details hit differently than you expected, or if one of them made you want to pull up an old episode tonight, drop a comment below and tell me which one got you. I read every single one. And speaking of shows that were hiding far more than they let on, next up, we're going into a very different kind of comedy. No war zone, no helicopters, just a New York apartment, 4 people, and allegedly, a show about nothing. Except, here's what they never told you. Jerry Seinfeld was offered $110 million to keep making Seinfeld for one more season. Not a rumor, an actual offer. And he turned it down. Not because the number wasn't right, but because he believed the story was done and refused to let money write one more episode. What that decision cost him, what it says about the entire run of the show, and the wild behind-the-scenes stories that most people still don't know, that's all in the next video. It's right there on your screen. Click it. You're already here.